right, joining me today is Jaden Kennedy. We're going to be announcing his recruitment process and announcement to where he'll be playing school or basketball at school next year. Former D1 transfer from Campbell University. That was how I reached out to you. I wanted to talk about this. Like I said, is Campbell, born and raised in the area. My coverage area for House Dash Enterprise is the Big South, so I appreciate the area and what you provided for at least a year there as a freshman. I want to talk through your process as a recruit, both previously and currently. We'll announce where you're going to be heading this fall, as well as just some things about where some goals and things like that. So first of all, introduce yourself, tell people what you're doing and what you're up to.
My name is Jaden Kennedy. I'm from District Heights, Maryland. Currently live in Columbia, South Carolina. Lived all over the country. You know, my mom was in the military for about 25 years. So I had great experiences with that. And now just, excited to get to my next place of basketball. I was at Campbell University for 2 years, actually. I graduated high school 2020. I ended up tearing my ACL my first year at Campbell. Second year, coming back, had a little, some growing pains, some struggles. Then decided to transfer to JUCO for my third year this past season. Now I'm on to my next stop. So,
yeah, I know talk me through a little bit about the military process. Anything that's kind of taught you? I know there's some famous examples. Shaq obviously was from a military background. He speaks to that all the time. David Robinson, Mike Krzyzewski, a couple of big names in basketball, of course, that have learned a lot through maybe where they grew up through the military process. So what has that taught you, or how has that helped you as a player?
No, it definitely teaches you discipline, not only as a person, but like player as well. I'm always, being on time is a big thing for me. Being early is a big thing for me. Doing things the right way is a big thing. My parents taught me about, because, if you don't do things right in the military, it can really affect, your career path. So, doing things the right way, discipline, always being focused as well is something that, my parents really instilled in me, so.
Absolutely. Well, without further ado, let's not delay the inevitable. I was going to slip up by accident and say, well, I guess Coach Blank is going to be excited about being one of the first guys in the gym, et cetera. But let the listeners know, let the audience know. Like I said, this will be out. We're recording this on Tuesday, May 30th. We'll be out in the next day. People will hear right now where you'll be going to school.
Yeah, so I'll be playing basketball at Oswego State for the remaining years of my eligibility. So I'm really excited to go and get to work and hopefully, make the tournament and win the championship. So.
Gotcha. Yeah, we'll get to that in just a second. Talk me through, I was going to say earlier, Coach Jason is going to be really excited about, like I said, your work ethic, getting in the gym early, like you said, some of that stuff with the military background. We'll get into some of the goals there at the end. Want to know kind of the lead up to this process. What did this look like? I know there was over 15 schools, if I had the math right, involved, or maybe more than that. You can correct me on that. But I know it was a long and interesting process. So talk me through and talk the listeners through maybe what, how does that look for you on, from the player's perspective on, okay, I've got this school, that school, all different levels from D2 all the way to NAIA. So just talk me through that process.
Yeah, the recruiting process can be real rigorous, can be real cutthroat as well. College basketball is something else. Talk to a lot of schools all over the country, and when it came to my decision, it wasn't more so about level. Like I said, I was at the Division I level, and I'm not really more so worried about the level or name, being like at a certain school. I'm more so worried about being at a school where I'm happy, we're winning, and it's a good environment and the culture. I've had the privilege of being a part of good winning cultures in high school, going to Ridgeview High School my senior year, winning and being able to win one of 3 state championships. So, I've seen what a winning culture is like and what it takes. And so I just want to get back to that and being a part of that. And so, that's what really stuck out with me and Oswego. I wasn't really considering D3 at first. But Oswego was, really impressive with everything that I've seen from them. Them being like 56-5 in the past 2 years, making the Elite 8 in the tournament, like everything that they've done winning wise has been really super impressive. So.
Yeah, all levels of ball are good ball. I always tell people that. I'm like, there's some really awesome opportunities for guys all over the college and even international landscape as well. This is one of those examples, like you said. I mean, we saw a team out of Florida this year in Division II. I mean, just absolutely run the table through Division II, and thinking that there's levels to this stuff. Like, seems like Oswego State's going to be a very, very good fit for you. What are you going to be bringing to the table to a team, like you mentioned already, a really good record over the last few years? 28-3 last year, 17-1 in conference. Like you mentioned, the Elite 8 as well. Also, this team can shoot, man. 46, 38, 71. So what are you bringing to Oswego, and how can you help that team achieve some success?
Yeah, I would describe my strengths in my game as being a three-level scorer and shooter. I really pride myself on that, as well as being a versatile defender. I've guarded a lot of great players, guarded some current NBA players, as well as rebounding. I feel like I bring a lot of rebounding at the guard spot, particularly offensive rebounding. That's something that I really pride myself on as well. My dad always taught me that offensive rebounding can really be crucial to someone's game. It can really help boost your game and make you stand out that much more. So yeah.
So far, so obviously, like I said, successful team going into that mold, and obviously being able to be impactful right away. Talk about your relationship with Coach Jason Leon. What does that look like, and how has he talked you through this process? And maybe something he might have said that kind of was convincing.
Oh yeah, we've had great conversations, throughout this whole process. I'm big on a relationships kind of person, and through me and his conversation so far, it really stuck out. He was somebody that I could trust and wanted to play for. Yeah, when I met when I went on the visit and we met in person, everything he said about the winning program and how he runs the program reminded me a lot of the high school that I graduated from. So like I said, I want to get back to being in a winning culture like that. And yeah, him describing how he runs his program, the pillars, the standards that they all apply, it really stuck out to me, and was something that I really wanted to be a part of. So.
As you'll be obviously going in there, like I said, to a really good roster and a good team, and showing what you're made of. What is something you're looking to add to your game this year on top of, you mentioned being a good rebounder, scorer, shooter, three levels here. What's something you're looking to add to your game to help strengthen what you bring to the table?
I would say being able to run the point more often. I've run point in the past. When I was at the high school in New York, I ran point a little bit. But just being able to be more of a full-time point if need be. So yeah, working on my handle, working on being able to run on offense. So.
Yeah, you've got a couple of guys that'll be leaving there at the guard spot, specifically, depending on what some of the eligibility years look like. But you've got a couple of seniors that are on the way out as well. So it looks like there may be a really good fit and role there for you moving forward. I don't have much more. Obviously, you mentioned earlier some goals. So let's talk through maybe some personal as well as obviously the team. You mentioned earlier, man, win a championship, right? Like, got to get back to some winning ways that you'd love to have. So
Right.
what's some goals that hopefully you guys in the team maybe have discussed, as well as something you have personally?
No, for me personally, I'm just want to go in and make an impact. Be a part of a winning culture. That's really just all I'm looking to do. Make an impact on the program and be valued in the program. And as far as winning, obviously winning a championship, like I said, they made the Elite Eight last year, and I think that we can really make a good push for a national championship. I've already met with some of the guys on the team. They seem like great guys. Really some really talented guys as well. So yeah, I definitely think that if we can put it all together, we have a great shot at winning a national championship.
Absolutely, yeah. One last thing I'll touch on too. You mentioned I like that you included the GPA part of it, like super intelligent kid. I really appreciate your transparency with that. So, is there anything from the recruiting side of things that obviously the schools do their own research, and I've talked to coaches and players before where, like, obviously, like Rice men's basketball coach Scott Parra was like, we basically have a list, right? And then we go into this, and then we go into that, and then we're like, okay, but are they also a fit for the school? So, talk me through a little bit about like what you're looking to study, anything like that may be important in that decision, like you went with.
Yeah, so Oswego, my degree will be business administration. In the past, it was business management, but they don't have business management, so business administration. The two coincide pretty much, anyways. And so
Fair.
my goal with that is to receive a bachelor's and eventually receive a master's. And I just want to do something still involved with the world of basketball. Whether that's coaching, whether that's being in more of a front office position. I feel like having a degree in business can really help my career in that aspect. So,
Absolutely.
yeah.
It's good knowledge. All right, I'll let you get out of here. I got one last question I like to ask every player or every coach or anybody like that in the process of actually playing basketball or coaching it. Who's your favorite NBA player of all time, and who's somebody you model your game after? I hope the answers are different.
All time, I would have to say Jordan.
Okay,
He's
fair.
my GOAT. Model my game after. I don't really think I have anybody I model my game after. I feel like when I was younger, I definitely looked up to like Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant was one of my favorite
Nice.
players when I was younger. Now I wouldn't say there's anybody really that I model my game after. I just try to be the best that I can be. Whether that's focusing on any type of different things. So
I love it. Yeah, I've been doing this for a couple of years now, talking to coaches and players, and no one said Carmelo Anthony yet. One of my favorite players of all time. When I'm at the park, I feel like I'm a guy that he gets the ball, he's a bucket. So obviously, recent retirement as well. So it's really.
I love him back in his Nuggets days.
Oh, I like a little further back. I like that. Yeah, I know most people probably remember him with the Knicks because of how the Knicks are as a team and just how much spotlight they really get. But awesome. Thank you very much, my friend. I appreciate having you today, and good luck in the future.
No, for sure. Appreciate you having me.
All right. Hope you enjoyed the interview with Jaden Kennedy at the top, talking about his commitment to, as you'll know by now, Oswego State. Nothing surprising now, as you saw earlier. Now to talk about the finals preview, bringing back old friend of the program, Mr. Chris O'Brien. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm happy to be back.
Appreciate it. I know you guys literally, timing-wise, is interesting. I know you guys literally just finished your finals preview, so this is all fresh on your mind and fresh on using your voice. So still want to make sure we talk about the finals. Wanted to bring you back on as it's about to get crazy because there's literally going to be no telling what's happening in this finals with all the storylines we're going to talk about in just a second, as well as it is kind of sad. It's like the last time we're going to truly have an opportunity to talk about hoops. Like that people care about, I guess would be the point.
I was talking to Ortiz about this earlier before we went live. It's crazy that the season's over already. Flew by. The playoffs flew by too, in particular.
I normally don't have the it flew by feeling, but this is the first time in a while I've really woke up and was like, I think for me personally, I can't speak for anybody else, but like I watched a ton of games this year. This is the first time I've ever like truly watched a ton of games. I probably watched like 75 Lakers games, which like sounds like a lot. And it is when you're on the East Coast and they're playing 10:30 tips basically 90% of the year. And I think just a lot of the way that the League Pass was, I know League Pass had its own problems this year, but like it was the first full immersive year for me on League Pass and like truly using it like it's supposed to be used in the playbacks and all that stuff. I don't know. I just feel drained. I'm kind of glad. I'm kind of glad the offseason's coming.
Yeah, I agree. It was a lot of basketball this year that I watched more than any other year. So.
The next time we'll talk, it will probably be, I mean, look, the free agency's coming up, the draft. I know that you've been doing some more draft stuff recently, so we'll make sure. Don't let me forget to ask that at the end about some of. I know Twitter, you're up there about some of your guys and stuff, but I'll throw a few draft things in at the end to make sure we hit that. So, really quick, don't forget that the announcement the other day went live that Reaction Podcast will go out after every NBA Finals game, live on Twitter and YouTube with. Longtime guest Grayson Hill. If you can't tune in live, they will be posted the next day. So pulling a card out of you guys' playbook, going live. I never thought I'd be a live podcast kind of guy, but the finals, you got to try something, and that's what we're doing. So I look forward to doing that, and that's the only plug that I'm going to throw in out there other than subscribe to the Ball Game Podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll see it on the screen. I'm getting used to StreamYard. Chris is all too familiar with it, so he's going to see me playing around with a bunch of the tickers and banners and stuff, and I promise we're actually going to talk about basketball. So with that being said, the finals, with the Nuggets and the Heat, obviously we don't want to jump right out the gate and be like, here's your prediction, but what is a really big thing that you're going to be watching for from a matchup standpoint, from a personal standpoint, it could be, some underlying storyline that you've always been thinking about and wanted to put out there? What's something that you'll be really looking into this series?
I think this is probably the obvious answer, but it's the Jokic-Bam matchup for me. I think that's the most interesting part of this series. I think that's where the series is going to be won and lost, and we'll talk about it, I'm sure, as the show goes on, but I think those are the two most important players on both sides in the series. So honestly, whoever ends up winning that matchup will probably win the series.
I want to talk about matchups because I do think it's interesting. I think last time we talked, we did Nets, Mavs, kind of their storylines at the time and maybe some things surrounding them. And, those two teams and some of the things that when you look at guys, you look at, okay, this point guard versus this point guard. But really nowadays, you really only, the way I look at NBA positionally, and we'll talk about the draft at the end with maybe some of your guys, but, to me, in the NBA, your position now, because of positionless and how the offense looks, like it's who you guard, right? So who your position is who you're guarding on defense. And someone made a really good point to me today that I really didn't think about it this way. Like it's obvious once you say it out loud, and I hope I can describe this right with Jokic and Bam, and I'm glad you led with that. Jokic on offense versus Bam on defense, right? Like that's going to be a very obvious matchup. That's kind of a wash, right? Like Bam's a good defender. Jokic, obviously, I'm not comparing the two. I'm not saying one's going to stop the other easily, but Jokic is best on offense. Bam's best on defense, right? So they wash each other in that regard, at least, the way they play. And then Jokic on defense versus Bam on offense wash each other out a little bit. So it's almost like this weird like thing. Like that's going to be the most interesting matchup. But at the same time, like if I'm the Heat, I'm probably just going to put my hands up and be like, if Jokic has a 55-point triple-double every night, whatever. Let Michael Porter Jr. beat us. Let Jamal Murray beat us, who's going to be a really interesting matchup we'll talk about in a moment.
Yeah, I think that's the most interesting part. The second thing you said, Bam's offense versus Jokic's defense. I think that's what I'm most interested to see. Like you said, Jokic is going to get his regardless. If I was the coach, if you were the coach, the idea would probably be let Jokic beat us. Those other guys, we have to stop them. We don't want to lose to Michael Porter Jr. We don't want to lose to Jamal Murray. Jokic, we're not going to stop him regardless of what we do. So I think Bam offensively, especially coming off the series he just came off of offensively, where it was kind of up in the air, a little bit wishy-washy, that I think he really needs to be aggressive in this matchup, and that's where the Heat can win the series.
Look, I'm in no way like, and this is something I've wanted to mention for a while, but just like Bam as a player coming out of Kentucky was so interesting because like he almost played like, you know, in the draft we like undervalue guys' size or overvalue depending on their position, and he was somebody that I think measured 6'9" without shoes and all that stuff, and I think that like plays into a really good point with Jokic though. Like he's so mobile, Bam. Like he does that like little, you know, high-low dribble handoff stuff on offense, and like that's where you see his mobility. But like he's one of the most mobile big men we've had in a while, and I think that's really going to be important against Jokic, who literally doesn't have like could play an entire half not in the post, and it would be okay. Like they would be completely fine on offense. They would run the 2-man game with Murray and all that stuff that we'll get into, but I think it's interesting what Bam brings defensively because of how mobile he is, and I think the quick feet's really going to be important. The matchup I'm looking forward to that I think is going to be interesting, as I mentioned on defense, is how you guard, right? Like who you guard is what your prototypical position is now. Michael Porter Jr. is not guarding anybody at a good rate right now, so where they try to disguise him on, you know, mano a mano, it would probably be Jimmy or whatever cluster of a power forward rotation they'd have with Kevin Love, right? I think if you're Denver, you're going to hope that Michael Porter Jr. isn't going to get abused, and that's one thing I'm really looking forward to seeing how that plays out.
For sure, yeah, that should be interesting. It should be interesting, but then you look at it on the other end, the Heat probably, I don't expect Kevin Love to get a bunch of burn in this series, so the Heat really aren't going to have anyone taller than 6'5", 6'6" to match up with Michael Porter Jr., and he's on the offensive end. He's been pretty incredible in these playoffs, and he's just a guy who could get a shot up over anyone. So I don't know if you really want him being guarded by someone 3 to 4 inches shorter than him. So it should be interesting on both ends, Michael Porter Jr. in the series.
If we literally just look at, I know this is a 1 seed versus an 8 seed, and I know that's like going to get clouded judgment here when this game goes 6 or the series goes 6 or 7. We're going to look up and be like, that doesn't make any sense. But like if we've watched all playoffs like we have, like it's very obvious that these teams are actually closer matched than people think, at least just from a logistical standpoint. But if you look at just look at the statistics, Denver outscores them by 6 in the playoffs here. I guess these are actually technically regular season stats, but out rebounds them in the regular season, which when these teams weren't exactly at their best all the time. But it's interesting that the NBA Finals stat tracker doesn't show you playoff stats; it shows you regular season comps. I thought that was interesting. But Denver obviously averages more assists, only half a steal less, average 4.5 more blocks, 1 more turnover. That's pretty normal for Jokic. And then they shoot 50% from the field. Denver does 37% from 3 and 75% from the line. Miami beats them from the line. So just from like an overview standpoint, what has to happen for Miami? Because I hate to ask it always like this and just be like, I don't want to be like a talking head. Like, you know, we're up here on First Take, you know, arguing, bicker and whatever. We're not going to do that. But what has to happen for Miami? And I'm not discrediting them being an 8 seed. I'm just going with the obvious, that they are the team that should not win this series just by logistical understanding of basketball. But what do they have to do to win this series? Like, what is the thing that has to happen no matter what? And I know the easy answer is probably Jimmy Butler has to average 35. So maybe if not that, assuming Jimmy has the series of his life, what has to happen?
I think it's Bam. Like I said,
Is he really that important, you think?
I really think he's the X factor in this series. I think offensively he's going to have to be great. He's going to have to give you 20 points a game at minimum. He's going to have to give you. I I hate to do this with Jokic because he's so incredible, and every time I say something about Jokic, he proves me wrong. Like, he really does. He's everything. I've been wrong about him for years. Like, I've already owned that on our podcast. But
I've been the opposite, by the way. Let me be clear. I picked Denver to make the finals in October, so like,
yeah, you did.
It was bound to happen, you know.
But I think Bam has the offensive skill set. I know the easy thing to say is about Jokic getting exposed defensively. It's an easy cop out, but a guy like Bam, who, like you mentioned earlier, and you were talking about defense, but just a guy who moves the way he does, I really think it could end up being a problem for Jokic. Jokic has been phenomenal defensively in these playoffs. Like, positionally, he's always been a pretty solid positional defender. That was never one of his problems, but especially in these playoffs, he's been borderline great in terms of just being in the right spot at the right time. But I just think Bam's quickness can, if he's aggressive, it could just open up the game for the Heat. Then I think the game needs to be open. You're going to have to put up points to beat Denver.
So I was trying to, yeah, go ahead. I see where you're going with it.
Like, as much as the Heat's defense is great, they play great team defense. You're not gonna stop the Denver Nuggets. The Nuggets aren't gonna have. What did the Celtics score last night? 84 points. The Nuggets aren't
something
scoring
in the 80s. It was bad.
They're not scoring 84 points in a game.
Oof.
So you're gonna have to put up points to beat them, and I think it starts with Bam. I think Jimmy, you kind of know what you're gonna get. Jimmy, regardless of how the defense he's getting, is gonna give you great stuff for the most part. Obviously, he has his stinkers here and there, but for the most part, he's gonna get to his spots. He's gonna get to the free throw line, no matter what coverage they're playing. But if Bam's aggressive and he's scoring, it opens up the floor for all the other guys, I think.
So, and this is where I went down with it yesterday when I started thinking about the finals and how I was going to mentally prepare myself, preview, make a prediction, etc. There has been a situation with a guy on the Heat in particular, and I'm going to beat around the bush on purpose for a second. There's a player on the Heat that in particular has been a lead player on a championship team that no one predicted or saw coming in that final series, and he ended up being one of the biggest reasons. And it probably got him a statue, and it probably got him into the Hall of Fame. And I'm talking about Kyle Lowry for a reason, right? In 2019, he was very intricate. Whether he shot that poorly in the finals or not, I don't want to hear it. He was a really, really important piece of that finals run. I know Fred VanVleet struggled all playoffs, and then they basically switched roles in the finals, but Kyle was still important, right? And he's a shell of himself now, right? We understand that. He's not a bad defender by any stretch of the imagination. And if he has 2 games, I'm just like two home games, right? They're going to play game 3 and 4 in Miami. He has 2 home games, 2 good games. Home doesn't matter, actually. Let me just be clear. If he has 2 games, right? Whether it's game 6, game 7, game 1, doesn't matter. If he has 2 good games, it swings the whole series. Like if Kyle Lowry has a 30-piece like you had earlier in the playoffs, I believe it was game 1 against the Knicks when Butler went down, stuff like that, right? He can step up in those moments. I think if he's that important for Miami to shut down Jamal Murray, which is totally possible, even though Jamal Murray's had one of the best playoff runs we've seen in a little while. I think Kyle Lowry is going to be so important. Like, and again, I'm trying to, from a coverage standpoint, and trying to talk about like I'm with you. I think Bam is that important for Miami, but I also think like as bad as their depth is, like polar opposite of Denver. Like Denver can play 9 deep comfortably, and they can play Jeff Green at 10 if they need to. Like it is what it is, right? But Miami, like their best lineup is their 6 or 7 guys. And you mentioned Kevin Love not getting that much. They're probably going to have to play him eventually. Like he's going to have to play minutes, even if it's like in those stretches in like the second quarter where you can't lose a game necessarily, but you can at least try to like keep yourself afloat. Long outlet passes, some rebounds from a big, don't get him too tired, etc. They'll have to play him. But to land the Kyle Lowry plane and kind of get your thoughts on that. Lowry has to just literally be impactful enough defensively. Like he's not going to give you 25, whatever. Like we know that, but he's got to be that important on Jamal Murray because they're going to be able to throw. Okay, cool. He stopped Jamal Murray. Now they're going to put out Christian Brown. They're going to start rotating these guys in and out, and it's going to be just this point where Miami's going to be too gassed, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think. We haven't even talked about him yet. We're 15 minutes in almost. Caleb Martin. Shout out to him. Great player. Just had literally a historic conference final. It's like there's honestly not even much to really be said. Some of the stuff he was doing last night, it really wasn't normal.
No. Would you have voted for him?
No.
Like if you had, yeah, okay. I wanted to like get to the head of that because someone tweeted at me and they were like, Caleb Martin's the best player in this series, so he probably should win the award.
He had a good case. He definitely had a good case.
Oh, he was 5. I was talking to somebody about this morning. There was 9 votes. They make it very clear very quickly who votes for those. There was 9 votes, so there can't be a tie. And it was 5-4 Butler. So I'm like, I mean, it's a lot closer than I think people understand.
Yeah, he definitely had a strong case.
Man, Charlotte Hornets
the
fans.
only reason he really had a case was because Jimmy had 2 stinkers. Jimmy played better than him for the series if you look at the series as a whole, but the consistency thing, I guess it matters. So that's where he has the case. I don't think he had a game in the series where he scored less than 18. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
something like
it
that.
was 18.4 or whatever it was, 18.6.
Yeah. So it was nuts. It was nuts, but I don't expect that to continue. I expect he'll play a role and he'll have his moments, but I can't expect him to shoot 60%. His true shooting was literally historic. I don't know what it was, but it was some crazy number. He shot like 60% from the field for the series. I just can't expect that to continue. So, like I said, Jimmy, I think you know what you're going to get out of Jimmy. I personally expect Bam to have a big series, but that's obviously not going to be enough to beat the Denver Nuggets. You're going to need other guys to step up. And a guy like Kyle Lowry, who for the most part hasn't contributed much throughout these playoffs, he's kind of due to have a few big games. So I think he could definitely be an X factor in the series.
I do have a talking head first take question for you. Before we get to that, though, there is a really important lesson to be learned in this finals, and I think the negative connotation of it needs to change, and we'll talk about the draft, like I said, at the end, just some guys in this class I'm curious about for you. But the Heat are rolling out, 5, 6 undrafted guys, rotationally, or have at least 5 or 6 of those guys on rotation, and then the Nuggets have guys like Christian Brown, like Bruce Brown, like Jeff Green, obviously, who was a top 5 pick, but is a savvy veteran now, but like, the type of guy and where you're drafted is irrelevant now if there's a way that you could fill an NBA role. And that's what's so important to me in this finals is like Christian Brown was one of the biggest reasons Kansas won a national title, right? And by the way, I'm happy that I'm getting his name right correctly consistently right now. I think repetition is important, and I've said Braun forever, and I'm finally getting into the Brown train. But like even Aaron Gordon, like figuring out a rotational spot for him from somebody that was sold off, from the Magic at a discounted rate, right? And understanding what your important piece is, but I think that speaks to the volume of the kind of players that Butler is, who helps make guys around him better, knows that there's buy-in there, which is why it didn't work out in Minnesota. We know that. And then we know what Jokic can be as a teammate and as a passer, and one of the best bigs we've ever seen doing what he's doing. So it's important that I think there's so many valuable pieces, regardless of how Miami's role players or not lack of depth, as I called it, can kill them, I think, but it's also important that these guys, as you talked about with Caleb Martin, unbelievable in their role, that I think we're seeing the showcase of the best player and why that matters. So
for sure. I mean, this is, I know there's some narratives about this is going to be a boring finals or whatever. I don't believe that.
I completely disagree. I'm not just saying that to say that. Like, I completely disagree.
I completely disagree too. That it's going to be high level, high IQ, just quality basketball to watch. And like you said, these guys are throughout the rotation, they're just winners. They figured out a way, so all of them have their own litlittle
chip on their shoulder.
Yeah, chip on their shoulder, whatever it is they went through, and they're just proving people wrong on both sides. It's going to be good basketball, and they still have the chip on their shoulder going into the finals. They still have stuff to prove to people. So it's going to be interesting.
There's a joke to be had about what Jamal Murray's adversity was, but we won't go down that rabbit hole. But if you know, you know. So I do have a talking head point for you, because I know people love the finals and want to hear previews and eventually do want to hear prediction, and we do want to get to the losers in these Western Conference finals and maybe just some really quick stuff there. But I love these kinds of questions because I am an NBA historian at heart, and I do care about how history repeats itself, both in a context of basketball and as well as just history in general. It's hard to sit here and look at these two guys, and obviously these storylines are going to happen now, next week, and then after June 18th. But first of all, I guess to lead the question out, does Jimmy Butler make the Hall of Fame if he doesn't win this finals? Yeah, a Hall of Famer for you. So he's 100% in.
I think he's locked. I think the way the Basketball Hall of Fame works, he's.
That's why I hate these conversations, because it's like, I'm with you. I agree. There are some bad dudes in the Hall of Fame.
Right, yeah.
And I don't mean that from a disrespectful standpoint. I mean that from if there's a standard level, we don't know what it is, right? It's not consistent. To
answer your question that I think you care more about to answer, I I'm not really moved by Jimmy Butler's legacy that much. He's a great player. Like, he was formidable. So I know Jimmy Butler like he's my brother. That's my guy. Have his jersey. Like, that's really my guy. I really love him till the day I die. But he's a great player, but there's a lot of players that I'm taking before I'm taking Jimmy Butler just on an all-time list. And even if he wins this ring, he definitely moves up. Like, you win a championship, your legacy's going to improve, obviously, but it's not marginal. Like, I'm not looking at Jimmy Butler really differently than I look at him at this point. I think once he beat Milwaukee, that's when he climbed up people's ladder, if that makes sense. Seeing him take down the 1 seed, that was like, all right, like, this playoff Jimmy thing's real. Like, this is who he is. He's going to rise in the playoffs. Everyone kind of really took note, but I know I picked the Celtics to win it all. Like, I am surprised he beat them, but when I look at it now, it's like, am I really surprised? Like, that's who Jimmy Butler is.
I think it's great that we're having this conversation because I think this is almost a little bit of like player team hate therapy for me. Because like, there's no, like, for the longest time, like, Pat Bev is the poster example of if he's not on your team, you hate him, and if he's on your team, then you love him, right? I hated Pat Bev until he was a Laker. Then now I'm like, you know what? I kind of been on this Pat Bev guy. Now that he's on my team and now has moved on. Butler is obviously not that example because he never played for the Lakers, but from just an understanding, like, they played each other in 2020, and I had to root against such a marvelous performance, right? And like, this playoff run, like, I'm in on Jimmy Butler, whether it's Hall of Famer. Like, I'm just happy for everything he does. I'm glad it's not against my team again. And at the end of the day, like, I needed this from a standpoint of, like, we sportate people, right? Like, at the end of the day, we have these, like, oh, you know, Celtics, Lakers, and all this other stuff. Carolina, Duke, right? You get that. But, you know, at the end of the day, we respect these guys. And, like, I'm just like, 8 seed hasn't happened since the Knicks in, 99 or 2000, whatever year that was, right? And, I mean, history tells me that he'd have no chance of winning this finals because if I remember correctly, that Knicks team got either swept or lost in 5 in that playoff round to the Lakers. But nonetheless, the question I really wanted to lead with, and I hope it's not just this easy answer, but like, whose legacy, like, who does this mean more? I hate to do these talking heads more thing, but it's a good question, I think. Does Jokic need this more or does Butler need this more? Is this more impactful for their legacy, like, overall? Is this just like clear cut? Is it Jokic or am I just like
think
crazy?
It's Jokic.
Okay. Even though he's 20, whatever he is, 27, 26. I don't even know.
I think Jokic is on the Jokic is already an all-time great, but like, he's on the trajectory of, I mean, we were talking about this in our group chat earlier today, like, he could finish as a top 20, top 15 player of all time. Like, well, we've never seen this before. I think Jimmy Butler, like I said, his legacy kind of is what it is. If he wins a ring, like I said, it definitely helps his legacy when you're having conversations of ranking him against other players, but I don't think it moves him up that much. Jokic, we're looking at, like I said, a potential top 15 player of all time when those guys win championships.
Yeah, I think that's where the ring thing becomes so important for where they are legacy-wise, and I think that's why it's at least, I knew it was probably an easy answer, but at the same time, like, I'm with you. I'm in the camp where, like, I've reached the point where, like, we haven't seen a guy like this since Larry Bird. Like, the way, like, and I think Jokic from a passing standpoint, from a rebounding standpoint, from, like, he's above that, and then I think IQ-wise they're on the same level. So, like, I'm just saying, like, we haven't seen a guy of this type of player and the versatility that's that important. I also think, like, if Jokic continues to do this and, like, we see the kind of player he is, you know, just from he doesn't have to be heliocentric, right? Like, he can be in any place at any time and it be impactful, right? I think we're reaching the point where I think people need to understand that, like, he might be, you mentioned top 15 at the end of his career, like, he might be a top, like, 10 offensive player of all time. Like, I've reached that point. I've heard people call him, like, a top 3 or the best offensive player of all time. I'm not there yet. But, like,
I think he's pretty easily a top 10.
It's happening.
Offense, I think he's pretty easily a top 10 offensive player we've seen. At least peak-wise. Obviously, he doesn't really have the longevity yet, but he's still in the middle of his career. He's just now...
He's 28. I just looked it up. He's 28.
Just now entering his prime, so...
And that's the thing about the Prime that's so interesting is like the NBA like has shifted in the way it's like, the health and the rehabilitation and all of that stuff, right? An ACL or an Achilles used to be career ending, and now it's 12 to 18 months and you're back. And you can also be an all-star apparently with that too. But it's one of those things like 28 like almost doesn't even mean anything anymore, because I'm like, a guy like him, especially like other than the beating he'll take as a big, like he can transition into like this just point guard at 36. Like, why can't he do the same thing Chris Paul did, right? Like, slim down, go vegan, just be a point guard at 30. Like, why can't he do that? I'm not wishing the next, few years of his career, but I do think this finals is really important for him because you're never guaranteed another one, right? So it's kind of like, if I care about the two, like if I had to just pick one, like pick a straw or make a stance and be like, this is the guy I want to win it, like I want Jokic to win this finals. Like I want people who have been irrationally hating, and you're not in that camp. Like I give you credit for that, right? Like you're in the just didn't believe in him camp, right? Like some guys were on Giannis. Like it was just like Giannis was a multiple time All-Star and people were still like, and a defensive player of the year and MVP, and people were still like, yeah, I don't know. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. He finally won a title, and it was like this like moment for people. But I'm just ready for people to just be like, who just hate Jokic, even if it's just like a troll thing. Like I just can't wait for them to just have to deal with the fact for the next 11 months that he's an NBA champion, and they'll be the reason that they win it.
I mean,
right?
look at a guy like Dirk. No one could ever question Dirk's legacy.
I loved him so much in that finals run.
Right, just among like the basketball community and discourse, no one ever has anything negative to say about Dirk
at all. Like I mean, it's
Dirk's
nothing.
Like literally a legend.
I think more people hate Tim Duncan long term than they do Dirk sometimes. Like it's so interesting. Now that I think about that,
no one.
I feel like I've heard more.
No one hates Dirk. You look at a guy, and the narrative on him just completely flipped, because the narrative before he won wasn't very pretty.
He was Karl Malone before that title.
Yeah,
they were literally in this. Well, okay, off court aside. Let me just be clear for the aggregators. Let me be clear. Yeah. But he was statistically, he was basically him and Karl Malone had the same career, all time wise, and it just all of a sudden that title and the way it happened, ironically enough, against the this is like NBA history writing itself here, right? I mean, I feel like we're just the commentators now. I mean, this is just crazy. All right, I do want to touch on the Celtics stuff in a minute, and the Lakers stuff very, very, very quickly, because I really don't think that. I mean, I think there's some at least thing to be talking about with LeBron stuff, but ultimately, who wins this series? How many games? And is there anything else X factor wise that could be a big difference? Because I think X factors are really important in predicting this stuff.
I'm gonna take the Heat in 7.
Oh my God!
I don't feel good about it. I said it on the podcast earlier. I really thought about it. I really broke it down. At first, all week, because we thought the Heat were advancing a week ago when they were up 3-0. We thought it was a lock they were going to advance to the finals. We thought it was set in stone already. And I was thinking about it, and I was like, Denver in 5. Like the Heat have no chance. And Coach Spo just keeps doing things that I can't really count him out. And I don't know, like, I guess it's the same thing again. I'm doubting Jokic again, but I really, really, truly believe, I've talked about him probably 5 times already throughout this 27 minutes we've been live, but Bam Adebayo, I really think could give him a problem. I know, like, historically, Jokic handles Bam, and I expect him to handle him offensively, but I really think Bam's offense could really just change this series. If Bam is aggressive and scoring the ball at a fairly efficient clip, I think the Heat offense is going to be able to hang just enough to be able. And Jimmy Butler in clutch time, I don't know if there's any player I'm taking over Jimmy Butler in clutch time right now.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm shocked that you said that, because like I feel like I didn't really get the indication you were pulling the wool over my eyes that we were like, I mean, yeah, the Bam thing was important. You mentioned it a couple times, but like I was not in the camp that you were just going to pick the Heat in 7. Like that is not where I thought you were going with that. So that's interesting.
I think if the Nuggets win the series, it'll be a lot of blowouts and they'll beat them convincingly. But if the Heat win the series, and like I predict the Heat to win the series, they're gonna win a lot of close games. They're gonna win 4 close games. And like I said, there's just no one I'm taking over Jimmy Butler in clutch time right now, honestly.
Yeah,
So,
there is a few things from crunch time that I don't have the numbers in front of me that would back it up, right? I think we were just so enamored by De'Aaron Fox and the Kings crunch time this year that it just no one else mattered. But there is some, like, we saw them kind of collapse against the Timberwolves in Game 4. I think that was just more like, what did Doc Rivers say? Playing with their meat, playing with their food is what he meant. But I think that Timberwolves series, like, that's Denver did. I mean, I think they just played around with Minnesota and they didn't take them seriously. And Anthony Edwards decided to win the game single-handedly in Game 4. But I think there's some stuff there that Denver like has figured out, and I think that's a testament to Coach Malone. And granted, a guy can be fired up all he wants. If suppose the better coach. But I think Malone has improved drastically, and I was in the camp they could have fired him a few years ago, and I'm very glad that they didn't. They stuck it out. He clearly has a scheme and a system that fits and works around the best player. And very convincingly, I said to someone, that if Boston makes the finals, like somehow, like obviously this was before I meant like pre Eastern Conference Finals. If Boston makes the finals, like Denver could sweep them. Like I really wouldn't even be shocked about that, especially after what we saw with the shot chucking and stuff with Boston. That is going to be my segue to Boston in just a second. But at the end of the day, I do think that Denver is this good. I do think sometimes there is just years where like the best team wins because they're the best team. And I know that that's going against every single thing. And I have a pit in my stomach even having this therapy session out loud with you. Like, I really don't pick against the Heat for any legitimate reason other than the fact that I do think Denver is the best team, and I think they win in 6.
fair enough.
So, really quick on Boston, I want to make sure we leave time for the draft and stuff at the end because you and I have never talked draft before, at least publicly. So, really quick, Boston has a lot of things that are really all over the place, obviously, with, first of all, they like literally were playing the Red Sox come back in the arena multiple times. Like it just like the energy was there. They could have done it. They would have been the first team in basketball history to do it, yada, 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 right? But we could be here all night talking about the things in the offseason. We're not going to spend forever on it, but I do want to get your thoughts on a couple of things. First of all, I mentioned pre-recording that I would like to make sure the record is straight for everyone involved. I made it very clear in my solo pod last week. Joe Mazzulla at 34 years old in his first year guiding one of the more intricate teams in NBA history from this standpoint. He should not be fired after 1 year, yes or no?
Absolutely not.
Thank you. 34 years old. If he won, I think I said this to I don't remember who I said this to on a pod, but if he won the NBA Finals this year, he would have been the youngest head coach to win it by over a decade.
It's crazy.
Like, doesn't need to go, right? Obviously, you lose Will Hardy, you lose a couple of important bench pieces, right? You lose a guy like Ime Udoka who's very important, very simple. I just don't understand a guy getting fired. This isn't the NFL where like it's a win-loss thing for the draft and it's that simple, right? Like you're losing a bunch of games, you should probably get fired, or whatever, change of scenery, yada yada yada. But I think the more interesting thing is like I don't want to sit here and just like agonize over the thought of Jaylen Brown being a $54 million player a year that would rise to 60-something odd million and ended up being a $290 million contract. I think you, I, and everyone listening just got nauseous when I said those numbers out loud. That's just where we are with the CBA. But I know we have time to think about it, so I'm not going to ask you for this rash answer. Are they trading Jaylen Brown? But like, is there a move that's not involving the two T's or two B's? What do they call them? The two J's. Thank you. God, doing these pods back to back. Two J's, right? Is there a move that you're interested in or been thinking about that might be really important for Boston, or are you at the point where you have no idea what the heck's happening like in the next 12 hours?
I think they have the same problem they've had for years now, honestly. I thought they were going to get over that problem this year, hence why I picked them to win it all, but the problem and the hole in the roster is still there. That's why I picked them to win it all this year, because I felt like every team this year had some type of hole and flaw in their roster. No team was perfect, in my opinion, but they lack playmaking. They severely lack playmaking. They've severely lacked playmaking for this whole run that they've been on, I feel like. And you see that in a game where Jason Tatum gets injured in the first 25 seconds of the game, and now you have to rely on pretty much Jaylen Brown to be your go-to guy, but you don't really have anyone to get Jaylen Brown in his spots. So now you're not only asking Jaylen Brown to be your guy, but you're asking Jaylen Brown, like, hey, we're giving you the ball and we're getting out of the way. Go make something happen. And that's just not who Jaylen Brown is. He's great in transition. He's developed his shooting and his ability to create for himself, but he's not that guy that you're giving the ball to for an entire game and saying, run the entire offense. And, I love Marcus Smart. He's phenomenal at what he's good at, but he's not the best playmaker. You look at a guy like Derek White, who, again, had an incredible playoff run, was honestly their only bright spot in last night's game, but he's not the best of playmakers. And even a guy like Malcolm Brogdon, he's just not an amazing playmaker for his position. These guys are average at best in terms of being a playmaker at the point guard position, and they're great at other things. But you look at a guy like Malcolm Brogdon, who was injured for most of this series and barely played. From me watching personally, my thought process wasn't, dang, the Celtics are really missing what Malcolm Brogdon provides right now. It was the same thing I've always been thinking about the Celtics, like, dang, the Celtics are missing some playmaking right now. And I don't know how realistic this guy is, but the first guy that came to my mind when thinking about this is a guy like Monte Morris.
I've got one better for you. I'm glad you at least threw me out a name, because I got one for you that I actually think will play a game. Okay. So first of all, before I say anything else, all great points from a playmaking standpoint. Like, it's eye-opening to me that Derek White is not a playmaking point guard, but yet he's still the most impactful offensive player that they've had the last 4 games. Like, it's right. Sad. Like, that is a place that you are where your point guard through and through, Derek White's their point guard right now, was their best player, yet he's not a true playmaker, and somebody has to prevent the shot chucking. Last year it was Ime Udoka, right? That team would have been susceptible to it. He wasn't going to play that game, right? So it's simple that it either takes a true playmaking point guard or a coach that just lays down the law. Ime, whether, all the stuff aside, Ime laid down the law, right? That was part of why they were so good defensively and why they came back, made that turnaround. I like this game. It's called Who Says No First or Faster. There's a team right now, and you mentioned playmaking, you mentioned Monte Morris. It's important, right? Like, it's super, super important to think that is like the obvious thing. So keeping that in mind, how fast, I guess, who says no faster, which by the way, I do think this is a lot more fun when I think it's a close trade, but like, I do think these teams can be partners this offseason. Phoenix picks up the phone and says, Chris Paul is, we've reached the back half of his contract, right? It'll be in that 2-year, $28 million. I think they had it backloaded, right? Where it was, they gave him all the money up front, try to win the title in the first 2 years. It's going to go down to 28 and come down from there. Both teams are not in very good cap places, and we know where Phoenix can be right now. And I'm going to try to very fast play with a trade on my other screen here in just a second. But who says no faster? Who hangs up the phone quicker? Brad Stevens or Matt Ishbia and James Jones? If Chris Paul is involved in some form or fashion. Do you see why I asked this question? It's so close. Like, I think this can actually happen.
Yeah. It depends on what the other assets are in the trade, but if I'm Boston and I hear a guy like Chris Paul is available, I think I'm pretty interested. And then if I'm Phoenix, I don't mind the idea of moving off of Chris Paul, if that makes sense.
So here's the issue, right? Boston's in a place where you look at the contract, you understand that Jaylen Brown's going to be up for his extension. We addressed that, 55 plus going up, right? Tatum's already going to be on the books for 28 plus going up, and it ended up being in the $200+ million range, right? So we know that that's there, right? Boston can figure out ways to fill in depth. We saw it this year with Hauser and some other things, and Pritchard is still not a bad player. They got to figure out what they're going to do with Grant Williams, who's an expiring $4.3 million contract. Gallinari has a team option, I believe, so they can waive that on, Robert Williams, etc. So Al Horford is still on a 3-year, $26 million contract. It's a lot of money, right, for a 37-year-old center that shoots threes, right? But if there's some way that Marcus Smart, Robert Williams is on the table, and maybe have to get a third team involved for Phoenix, I think that both teams at least consider it, because Phoenix is to the point where they're trying anything they can, and they don't think probably that a 38-year-old Chris Paul, 37-year-old Chris Paul, that is to the point where he is injury prone, right? We've seen the thing where he's not going to make it through 60 some odd games, right? And then in the playoffs, once again, not able to consistently be there. So why Boston obviously takes that risk? Well, it's the best playmaker you can get possibly for the age and the contract, right? So it's at least taking the biggest swing in the fence versus taking another Derek White. Having 3 Derek Whites, sometimes having 1 Chris Paul might be better even at the stage of his career. So, look, I know there's more to this, and you're probably going to have to get a third team involved. Other than I've tried to play around with the contracts, and literally the only financial way it even makes sense is having Al Horford in the deal. I just don't see that being possible. So, with that being understood, like, I think Chris Paul is going to be a very valuable player this offseason for people like Boston who are just looking to make that swing, make that call, and at least consider it. I just don't know if it's a Brad Stevens type move. So I just beat around the bush for me to tell you that I actually don't think it's that possible. But the point I'm making is like that's the type of guy they're going to want to go after.
Yeah, I highly doubt it, but it's definitely, like you said, if you're both teams, you're at least picking up the phone.
Crazier things have happened from this standpoint in Chris Paul's career, and Russell Westbrook and John Wall and some of these guys have been moved with these large contracts. We know it's not impossible, right? And we know a team like Boston, I know it's not Danny Ainge, because if it was Danny Ainge, the deal might have been done already, but like at the deadline last year. But neither here nor there. I do think that's important. Like Monte Morris, there's names like that. Like I said, you get a few Derek Whites, you get a few Monte Morrises. Simple, right? But I do think that that's something we should explore in another conversation for another time. Some of the more realistic possibilities once we see how free agency shakes out, and obviously we know that the draft is coming up and anything can happen with some of those moves. So again, fiscally, Ayton's coming out of that deal probably in some way, and a third team that's probably where like Indiana gets involved for Ayton maybe again. I think 3 teams is going to have to happen after looking at the cap sheets here. It's just abysmal. These cap sheets are awful.
Sure.
So all right, anything. I mean, Boston, it is what Boston is going to be right now, and we don't know enough, but I know it's the hot topic of conversation. So I'll just ask you so we can have room for the draft here. When a guy retires or when a guy loses in a series late into the playoffs, in football it happens all the time, right? Quarterback gets hit too many times, and they're like, oh, yeah, no, man, I don't know how many more years I got left in me, right? It's the worst time you can possibly talk about it or be asked about it, right? Right after a big loss, right after you've been beaten up for 16 NFL games, right, or more, right? Do you think LeBron's being serious? And if so, why? I guess would be my question.
Absolutely not.
It's that simple for you?
He just scored 40 points in an elimination game. He's not retiring.
Do you think he takes a year off?
No.
Do you think he actually takes a... Because I've seen the theory. Like, he takes a year off. He enjoys Bronny at USC. He's a free agent after that. Yada, yada, yada. I know the contract's not that simple, right? But this is his last year in the Lakers deal. A simple put, like, just contractually, this is how it's going to end up being, right? Like, it's his last year, right? And ultimately, if the point is to win a championship, then yes, you play another year and you try to win again. But we saw that, like, the car, the car's got a lot of miles on it, right? Car still runs, car still drives, right? We've tried changing the tires. We've tried spending $200 million or whatever he spends on his body every year, right? We've tried to do all the cosmetic things we can to get this car continuing to run. But sometimes the car just doesn't always look the best, right? And that's what we've seen. I'm using LeBron as a car analogy, and it's not always perfect. But the point I'm making is I think it's interesting to think that the timing of this is like he knows what he's doing, right? Like the 1-year contract left. Bronny ultimately has a good year at USC. Hypothetically, and he goes on to be even if he's a second-round pick, right? Like at that point, LeBron's made it very clear if the team is willing to do it, he's signing with the team that drafts Bronny, right? So the year off the table, right? Or do you think are you in the camp that he did this for narrative?
I think he probably did it for narrative and
to shape it.
Yeah, and that's okay. I don't care.
I like it.
It doesn't
I like
really
that you don't care. I like that you're like, okay, yeah, who cares?
I don't know.
It's
That's
LeBron.
what LeBron does. Yeah, like. There's always, if he loses, there's always a story. That's how it is. I don't think that's LeBron coming out and saying there must be a story, but it's part of his marketing and PR team over the years. Like that's just how it is. It was just the right thing to say. Like maybe the idea behind it was just to light a fire under Anthony Davis. Who knows?
I like that you're giving me all these other angles I didn't think about. I don't
know. I just can't see him. He loves the game too much. To just sit out, especially to just sit out for a year when he's under contract, when he knows that's crippling the team.
Yeah.
Like, that's just not like he loves the game too much. I don't know him.
I think he loved this team too. That's what makes it so interesting to think about.
For sure.
Like, I think if this team, obviously there's a lot of, he even alluded to it in the press conference. Like there's just a lot of contractual things that have to happen for this team to be brought back together. And if not, then obviously they've got a lot to bring together and see what Rob Pelinka can do. We've seen him do it before. But, yeah, I don't want to spend forever on LeBron because I do think that it is I think it's the quarterback thing. Like, you get hit too many times. Like, you're always going to be thinking about that. And I do think Melo retiring the same day really did matter.
Yeah.
I really think I think that was why it came up more than it should have, right? I also made a point of this in my solo pod, which is why I'm bringing it up now, so I don't just talk to myself every time I bring this point up. But there's only a few guys that LeBron's reached this point. There's only a few guys now that he, like, in the media, like, he'll reveal things to or talk to about his camp, et cetera, right? Like, obviously Brian Windhorst, like, we know that is Windhorst has been covering him for the longest time, the best reliable information, et cetera. The other guy is Dave McMenamin. And that's who broke this interesting conversation that they had after he walked off the podium, right? David McMenamin's talking on the podium with him and then gets him in a hallway with the conversation, clarifying, does that mean you would walk away, yada, yada, yada. And he's like, the back and forth was probably 2 minutes, but, like, we saw the tweet. It was there. That's what blew up everyone's phone at 2 a.m., whatever it was, Eastern, and then people woke up and saw it. So I do think that there's validity that it came from Dave McMenamin. I do think that has to be said because that's super important now when guys like him, like, same example, Brian Windhorst with the Utah thing, right? Like, that stuff happens, you need to listen. Like, that is like, if Brian Windhorst did anything outside of basketball, like, with knowing what we know about him in basketball, I would believe anything that he said. Like, I'd be like, yep, I think I need to listen to him about what's going on, right? If Brian Windhorst was a news reporter, I'd be watching the news every day, right? Like, that is important from a basketball standpoint and from a reporting standpoint with him and McMenamin. So, all right. Let's do the draft really fast. You have some guys you've tweeted about. I think there's one in particular, if I'm correct, that I would love to hear more about that I am personally not as in on, but I'll ask you the way I ask other draft chat guests in the past. We'll kind of make this a mini draft chat segment. Who is your guy? No matter what, every draft, everybody's got one. They're the guy, and it can't be Victor and it can't be Scoot. Let me just be upfront about that. But it can't be one of those two guys, right? They're going to probably be generational players. Who's Chris's guy? You're going to believe in till the bitter end, whether he goes to the wrong team, whether he's a 5-year NBA player, whether he's a 20-year vet that makes the Hall of Fame. Who is Chris's guy?
Gigi Jackson.
Really? That's not who I thought you were going to say, so I'm ready to talk about this.
I was going to say Anthony Black.
I did, and I am not in that camp.
They're both neck and neck. So I'll talk about Gigi Jackson first. He's been my guy the whole time. Former UNC commit. That's why I'm kind of drawn to him because I thought he was going to come play at UNC.
Well, you also got Elliot Cadeau today. If you probably saw that, yeah. It's crazy though because of the going to be a lot of guys that want the ball, and he's a guy that can pass the ball and needs the ball to pass it. So there's a lot more there.
They're saying he's the best passing point guard we've seen since Kendall Marshall. I think Hubert's gonna realize early on that he needs the ball in his hands. But super excited for that. But Gigi Jackson, it's just. You could look at the college stats, say he wasn't that good, he wasn't that efficient, but you have to really just break down his tape to understand what you're getting with Gigi Jackson. And I saw a bunch of guys tweeting about this past week actually, and I honestly don't remember who, so I'm sorry, I'm not giving them credit, but a lot of guys tweeting about how important high school tape is. I think someone was speaking about a conversation they had with Bam Adebayo. I don't know if you saw
Raphael Barlow. I'll give you the credit right there. Raphael Barlow.
Who's
if I can
also
find the
very
tweet,
high on Gigi Jackson.
If I can find the tweet, I'll put it on YouTube on the screen.
Yes. But talking about a conversation he had with Bam Adebayo, just pretty much saying about how important the high school film is and how within a college system, you don't really get to showcase everything you could do on a basketball court. And we saw South Carolina, Gigi Jackson got thrusted into a role that NBA superstars play. If you want me to be brutally honest, it was you're the best player on this team. A lot of what we do is going to be ran through you, whether you're shooting well, playing well or not. Like, you're going to have to take and make shots. That's how we're going to win games. We win or lose based on how you play. That's how a lot of NBA superstars, that's what their role is. So you saw things that I think you see from all-star level NBA players. I mean, the first thing that jumps off the page is his size and the way he moves. I've had several tweets about this, but it's really not normal to me. And we always talk about the guys like KD, Paul George, like he's up there with those guys. And I know Brandon Miller is getting the Paul George comp more than anybody in this class, but Gigi Jackson, I don't see that either. But
I think Cam Whitmore's closer to Paul George than Brandon Miller is, but
Yeah.
that's neither here nor there.
I think Rashard Lewis is a great comp for Brandon Miller.
See, people are going to hear that, and they're going to, like, the aggregators are going to be like, that's a super ridiculous ceiling, but I am making it very clear for the 1,000th time that people need to stop overreacting to player comps, right?
Yeah,
There's a reminds me of Val, and I know exactly what you mean, right? He reminds you of Rashard Lewis.
Right.
Straight up, right? I have completely changed mine. When I post
good at
anything about comps, I am very clear that it reminds me of now, right? The example I give people, all the time, Scoot Henderson reminds me of John Wall. They're completely different players. But when I close my eyes, the perfect example I give, and you'll love this. Keontae George, when you close your eyes, like you know the Jordan Kobe thing when they did the little ghost shadow over each other, and it's crazy how Kobe just like used his moves. If you close your eyes and you think about Keontae George, is there somebody that comes to mind? I'd love to see if you can think of one. Like if you just like did that ghost thing again with Kobe over Jordan, if you did that with Keontae George, there's a perfect answer offensively.
I might not be thinking of the same guy you're thinking of, but I see a little bit of Brandon Roy and Keontae George.
Oh, okay, that's a good one. But Bradley Beal, I think they're identical offensively. Like it is crazy
100%.
coming out of Florida.
Their shot mechanics, they shoot the ball.
That's the example I give. I am in no way saying Keontae George is going to be Bradley Beal because he's a better defender, and I think their ceilings could be completely different. But what I'm saying is they remind me of them, and I like that you bring up the way Brandon Miller looks like this, and then like Gigi, right? Like obviously very loosely, like look, there's guys that are big that shoot that move like this. I keep going on Gigi, but I am with you. I am not in like the top 10, top 5 like a lot of people, but I do think that just because I have a guy at X number doesn't mean I don't think that they're good. I think there's just guys in front of them I like better.
Yeah, I don't know. It's as simple as a guy with as much potential as he has in the upside. I'd really truly believe he's an all-star wing in the NBA if he reaches his ceiling. Potentially even an all-NBA guy. Potentially the type of guy that you build a championship contender around. Jokic is doing things we've never seen before, but traditionally the past decade or so in the NBA, the ideal thing was to have these wings that could play both sides of the ball and that could handle the ball and run your offense at times. I don't think Gigi Jackson's like a LeBron where he's going to be running your offense, but just the handle and the way he moves, you could give him the ball and he could be your primary guy for stretches at a time. Like a guy like KD, who KD's not the best playmaker in the world, but KD you could give the ball to and he could run your offense for stretches. And the shooting mechanics are there. I think he projects well as an NBA defender, as a weak side guy, and eventually he'll develop, I think, into a okay to average on-ball defender. I think a lot of his defensive struggles this year was just based on his situation in college. South Carolina was kind of done and written off pretty early. Like they weren't really good at all. So I don't know. I really think he's going to be a special player.
There's not a bad thing you said, because at the end of the day, it's less about the team for me defensively. It's about the fact that he's 18 years old, right? He's 17 when he started the year. I think 18 once they started SEC play. I mean, like literally you were playing Division I college basketball at the SEC level and you're 17 years old and you're succeeding. Like it's important. And also the fact that like from a development standpoint, we're to this point in the draft community where the toxicity is the highest I've ever seen it, and it's disgusting. And he's a guy that's like tearing people apart because like of the attitude stuff, the Instagram story, whatever. I don't want to hear it. I want to hear the fact that this is one of the best shot makers, creators in this class, in the last couple of classes, at 18 years old, who's, by the way, 6'10" without shoes, if I'm correct, 6'9" without shoes, whatever it is, 6'11", 6'10". And I'm with you. Like I said, just because I don't have him securely in the top 14, to be fair, right now he's 16. I'm finishing up the big border to be due mid-June before the draft, right? I'm not going to put one out on the first that's not ready. It is what it is. But he's a guy that needs to be considered for a team that like is ready to give him time and ready to just like say, this is a guy that we're going to build our championship team around. Honestly, as crazy as it sounds, I know Franz Wagner is a very similar player in that regard of like, big potential, long arms, shooter type of guy. But why can't he be the 3 for them, right? Like, why can't that be a really big 3, 4, 5? I'm just throwing out a team without even looking at their draft order, right? Obviously, I think there's spots that could be detrimental for his development, like Washington, et cetera. But at the end of the day, Gigi's really, really good, and I'm glad that you said him and not Anthony Black.
I think even the Spurs, I know there's been rumors about the Spurs potentially trading for another lottery pick. I think you've draft, obviously they're getting Victor. You have Victor, and now you have Gigi Jackson. Like, forget everything else. Like, yeah, they have a cool young core already in place, but like those are your two guys. And like if those two guys hit what I think is their peaks, like those are the two best players on a championship team right there. Like there you go. Like that's your foundation right there. You could fill out the rest.
I like that. I don't think they'll move up probably, but I
don't
think they'll
so
take
either.
advantage. They'll take advantage if he falls. They'll take advantage of the fact because I think they have one somewhere in the 20s. I think they have
pretty
another
sure.
first, right? So regardless if they do or not, I'll be really quick on Anthony Black because I know he's your other guy, right? And I'll give you two of mine, and I'll ask for a sleeper, and we'll get out of here. So Anthony Black, I still have in the top 15. Let me just be clear, like 14 or 15 right now. Right. So I'm not saying I think he's not going to be good. What I'm undervaluing that people are overvaluing, I think, is the shot making long term, right? Which I think is something that can get better, and I'm not discrediting that, but I think he's going to be really awesome. And by the way, I've told you this before. I think if not, then I'll tell you this. I don't throw the term connecting piece around at all because I think it's a very, very high praise especially for a prospect. There's only 3 in this class, and Anthony Black is one of the best connecting pieces in this class. So if I can say that about him in one vein, and then also be like, hey, I don't think the shot develops very quickly, if not at all, like consistently long term, right? Very like Lonzo Ball-esque, even though it did come around for him later in his career before the injuries, right? I do think his shot was getting really good, but at the end of the day, I just think that he's going to be better as a secondary playmaker, and I think that's okay. And I think that's why I'm undervaluing him. Now, if he ends up getting the ball in a place like Orlando, that's awesome. Like I keep using Orlando as like because they literally need everything except for technically a 4 and a 5, right? Like they need 3, 4, probably 3, 4, 5, whatever. They need any guy like him, right? I do think there's a better fit for them personally at 6, but regardless, I think that he'll be a lottery pick, and I think he'll be very valuable. I just hope to God it isn't to like somewhere that's just gonna like make him do too much. Like let him be comfortable, like he was in those Maui Invitational games where he had 32. He had 32 because half his team was out, right? Like, and he had to step up and be an important player, and he was. So I do think he's very, very good. I just think there are some things that I'm just not buying long term. Right.
I think that's why I have him so high though, because of the things you said. I think he has such a high floor because of the things he's good at. I think there's no question in my mind he's going to be an impactful NBA player to some extent. And then if he goes to the right spot with the right people and he develops the shot making and just the overall being able to catch and shoot, then we're looking at a potential all-star. I mean, he's going to come in automatically and be one of the better defensive guards in the league just with his size, honestly. Forget about his defensive skills and what he's like mental and all that stuff. Just strictly because of his size, he's going to be a very good defender. And then you add that he's good with his hands and stuff like that. Like he's going to come in and right away potentially be an all defensive guard. Obviously, he won't make an all defensive team as a rookie, but he's going to play that type of value. And then you look at his playmaking, like you said, in terms of being a connecting piece. I mean, he's a great playmaker. He loves to get out and run. He's good enough in the pick and roll as a playmaker. I think the pick and roll is going to be iffy for him when he comes in because teams are going to slip under screens, obviously, because he can't shoot. But he's a good enough playmaker out of the pick and roll already. And then if he develops the jump shot, I think he becomes a lethal pick and roll player. And I just think he's pretty safe as a pick, and that's why I have him so high.
Yeah, I like the floor thing because I do see the floor. I didn't see it earlier in the year as much, but I think the floor, I think there's a guard in the same range in Casey Wallace that has a really, really good floor from a defensive standpoint, and I do have him ahead of him. I actually do technically right now have JHS above Anthony Black, but it's only one spot, so 2 spots actually. I moved both of them up. So there you go. A live accidental slip up there. They both moved up multiple spots, and actually GG is now 13th. So I've actually started playing around with it more. This is by no means done. All this could be outdated tomorrow when I sit down and do it again.
Around a lot over the past week.
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, I'm not ready for mine to come out because I'm not ready for the reactions because I do think I've reached the point where there's some guys that I've just like completely like I'm set where they are and I'm okay with that. I'll give you a sleeper and you can give me one and we'll get out of here. A sleeper that I think is really important right now. He's not necessarily a sleeper now after the combine performance, but Olivier Maxence Prosper is another guy. But the guy I'll actually give you, I think Trey Alexander's deserving of a late first-round pick, and he's unbelievable. Guy that I really just like didn't understand at first throughout the year with Creighton because of the other playmakers in their backcourt. Then I realized that he's the best playmaker in their backcourt. He's one of the best pick and roll players in the country, and he has a 6'10" wingspan.
Yeah.
Like all of it just added up. I was like, you know what? This is. I don't need to overthink this. So yeah, very excited about him. Who's a sleeper for you?
Sure.
And everybody, by the way, everyone's sleeper is different. Like I think people need to hear that. Like I have Trey Alexander in like I think 30 something right now, like mid 30s or low 30s, and people might have him in the 50s, and that might be why I consider him a sleeper, right? And then for you, you might give me a guy that I've got in the 10s or the 20s or like. So sleeper is subjective. So whatever you say, I'll be curious where it ends up.
Yeah, I think there's so many. And I think this is really such a loaded draft class, honestly. I don't know if that's just because it's the most in-depth I've personally covered a draft class to this point, but
I felt the same way for this year. And then I looked, I just hate the 20s. I hate the 20s because I don't think I understand. Like, I'd love to put these guys in the 20s and the teens like they deserve. And I'd love to put these guys in the 20s and the 30s because there's just some NBA skills that they just have. Like, I just hate, like, I hate 19 to, like, 22, 19 to, like, 27.
it's there because there's kind of like a tier gap.
Yes, that's essentially, yes.
Yeah. But my biggest sleeper, probably a guy that I think I'm higher than almost all consensus on, is Adam Flagler from Baylor.
I like that sleeper because I think he's outside of my top 70 right now.
I think whether he gets drafted or he's a two-way guy, I think he's just one of those guys. I don't think he's going to reach the heights of a guy like Jalen Brunson, but I always use Jalen Brunson when I make this example. He's just one of those guys where you watch them in college and it's kind of inevitable that they're going to make an NBA impact, in my opinion. He was a winner in college. He could shoot the three ball, he could play make, and he could defend. It's as simple as that. 3 skills that'll get you playing time on an NBA roster.
Now you're making me second guess something. I haven't made it into the 60s and 70s necessarily in detail just yet. Again, I have a ranking there, but not necessarily one I'm willing to put out publicly on him yet. But at the end of the day, like, yeah, I mean, look, that's convincing enough right there that there's some things that I need to look at again. So I like it. I'm glad we had this conversation. All right.
I think last year he was arguably Baylor's best player.
Yeah.
When UNC beat them in the tournament. Not this year with Keontae George, the year prior when Sohan was still there. I think he was arguably their best player during the season. So
definitely one of. All right, my friend. Thank you, first of all. Second of all, plug away everything. I'm going to go ahead and put it on the screen again. Subscribe to the Ball Game Podcast below. Everything will be linked for you, but plug away. Let people know what you are working on, what you've got working on, etc.
Yeah, just check us out on YouTube, the Ball Game Podcast. We're on TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, all that fun stuff. Just look up the Ball Game Podcast. We'll probably come up, but similar content to what you're seeing over here. Just trying to get in depth with the NBA. Not as much college stuff over there, but I'm going to try and get the guys to do their draft research sometime soon. They keep telling me no. I keep suggesting a mock draft to them, and they keep telling me no, we're not ready yet. So hopefully soon. But
they're running out of time. They have 23 days tomorrow.
Yeah, it's gonna well, that's what I keep telling them. I keep telling them, let's do a mock draft. And they're like, nah, it's too early. It's too early. But I'm like, bro, we could do multiple mock drafts.
It's too early when it's literally the draft's on the June 22nd. I love it. Hey, look, I get it. Some people just don't do it. It is what it is. And, I'm with you. I appreciate you trying to be in it and just go through it because it's a really, like, this is the first time I've never published a 100 list before. Like, that blows my mind to think that I did 30 last year. And I'm proud of that 30 because a lot of those guys are really good and I'm very happy about it. But then, like, 100, like, there's going to be a guy at, like, 97 that I'm going to be really mad about. Like, I'm going to be like, he worked out. What the heck? Like, I'm just going to be mad. Like, it is what it is, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So, thank you again for so much. Obviously, Heat and 7 for you. So, I'm looking forward to having you back on free agency, draft, whatever it is in the future. So, keep doing what y'all are doing over at the Ball Game. I appreciate your time.
Appreciate it.